That became clear to me one afternoon when I spoke at a Lifebeat event in Manhattan. Mary and our infant son Jackson Stephen were in the audience. I wanted him to know that he had an uncle and that he had been loved.
Chapter 13. My Fellow Music Nerds.
Between the radio station, school, and my internships, I didn't have much spare time. What little I did, I spent at the Roosevelt Field Mall. There was a great head shop there with black lights and Pink Floyd t-shirts. And it also happened to be home to the greatest record store in the history of the world, or at least Garden City. Record World was where my brothers bought all my Christmas gifts. It's where I bought all the albums that filled the orange crates Stephen left behind. In my junior year of college, a girlfriend gave me a $200 Record World gift certificate, an unheard of amount of money. To the people that worked there, I became the guy who had the gift certificate. I never spent it all at once. I slowly chipped away at it, being very selective about my choices. I didn't want to waste a penny on stuff I'd listened to once and scrap. I bought Hall & Oates' Private Eyes and the Cars' first album. I was spending a lot of time there. By my senior year, my internships had ended, and I was rich with experience. I was also broke. My buddy Steve's older brother worked at Record World, and I asked if he could get me a part-time job there. Really, I just wanted to make a few more bucks to buy beer and even more records. A gig at Record World would let me do that while feeding my musical Jones. None of my boys cared about music the way I did, but everyone who worked at Record World had that bug. They loved listening, talking, debating, and learning about records and musicians and sound. They were just like me. It was one more group of surrogates I could count on. Plus, I got a 30% employee discount. We were the quintessential record snobs or nerds, depending on which side of the counter you stood. Think of the movie High Fidelity, and that was my life at Record World. There was Ken, who only cared about the Beatles. As far as he was concerned, they were the greatest group of all time, and any group that wasn't them was automatically inferior. If you started talking about Earth, Wind, and Fire, you couldn't finish a sentence before Ken would come sprinting across the store. They recorded a version of Got to Get You Into My Life, you know? There was a woman named Mary McCann, but we used to call her Mary McTapes because she worked in the tapes department. There was a cute girl, a quintessential Jap, who loved all the dance music. Rob was a buddy of mine who was a little bit younger. We tried to be less judgmental of music and instead acknowledge the brilliance in all of it. Our philosophy, and we had one, was that a good song was a good song, whether it was rock or pop. He remained a great friend, and we still have debates about music. Karen Raitt, who worked there, is still a close friend. She became a bigwig at Interscope, dealing with artists like Eminem. When she brings guests to the show, we'll sit in the green room saying to each other, "Can you believe we get to do the shit we dreamed about doing all those years ago?" We joke about how when we were at Record World, we used to think the people who had the coolest jobs were the guys who worked for record companies putting together in-store displays. Then there was Leslie, whose brother Elliot Easton was the lead guitarist in the Cars. Leslie talked about the Cars all the time, dropping the fact that his brother was in the band at every opportunity. Most of us working there were college students making a little extra cash, but Leslie was older, so we gave him a hard time. One day we got sick of him talking about the Cars, and someone said to him, "Leslie, can't your brother get you a job sharpening pencils for the Cars?" Believe me, it hurt at the time. We all had our specialties. Mine was that I was a whiz at 70s pop music, especially the singles. It became like a game show in the store. Somebody, a grandmother, would come in asking for a record, and she'd give you nothing, no hints at all. My son said there's a band, or somebody would come in tunelessly humming a song, having only a few lyrics. Free on my own, that's the way I used to be. Inevitably, the other staff would come over, repeat the lyrics or hum a bit of the tune, and I'd identify the song and artist. Fooled Around and Fell in Love by Elvin Bishop, by the way. There was no internet. You didn't go to play it. There was a big book in the back of the store that listed every song ever made by title and artist. We were constantly adding pages and replacing the ones that fell out because we thumbed through it so much. We felt like we owned the place, and customers weren't immune from our snark either. People would come in and stare at me because they thought I was John Oates. I wore a blue vest that had a name tag with Gary written on it, clearly. But once a guy came up to me and looked me up and down, side to side, and said, "Are you John Oates?" I said, "Yeah, that's why I work at a record store making minimum wage." The store was long and narrow with cash registers on either side of the aisle. The walls were lined with album covers, 70 to 80 on each side. Up front on the right were the 45s, in the back left was classical, which no one ever bought, and in the way back were cassettes. Down in the basement was the stockroom, where we had lunch every day. We went to Woolworth's and bought chicken salad sandwiches. The front of the store was where all the action happened. That's where the boat with the best-selling records was set up. If a new record came out and no one had heard of it yet, then we'd get sent 3 copies from the label. If a band was well-known, you might get 25 copies. With really well-known bands, we got 50. And with a supergroup like Bruce, we were sent 100. I wasn't there when Barbra Streisand released Guilty in 1980, but I'm told the response was insane. That had gone down as the single most harried day in the history of record world. Until December 12th, 1983, the day Thriller was released. Records came in boxes of 100. Before we could put them on the floor, we had to unpack them all, make sure we received the right amount of copies, and then label them with a sticker price. We must have gotten 1,000 copies of Thriller that day. I remember coming up one afternoon carrying a full box of albums. 100 albums is heavy, and there was a crowd waiting for me at the entrance of the basement. They'd heard I was down there with the new Thrillers. People started pulling them off the pile before I could get to the boat. By the time I got there, I had 2 albums left. This was a narrow fucking store. I didn't know how it could hold a mob 100 people wide. When the day ended, out of the 1,000 Thriller albums we started with, we had just 6 left, enough to last the first hour or so of the next morning until we got the next shipment. When the new music came out, we were all over it, loving something when no more than 3 people in the country were into it. That was part of why we liked it so much. No one else knew as much as we did. But as soon as a group became popular, we dropped them. European New Wave was big back then, and I was responsible for ordering all those records. I was the guy who imported 99 Luftballons to Record World. We fought about what record would get played over the in-store loudspeakers. We'd let the album unspool at full length. This is back when albums told stories as movies do. Pete Townshend's All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes, Joe Jackson's Night and Day, Rush's Subdivisions. We didn't skimp on a single track. Then we'd have to play some top 40 hits, store policy, before the fight started all over again about who had next. Some nights we put on the strangest records we could find, hoping to entice browsing customers into buying it. When they did, we'd say to one another, chalk it up to in-store play. And when we closed the store at the end of the day, we drove around Long Island to see the local bands we loved. The great thing about Record World was that if you worked there and you owned an album that was in good condition, you could trade it in for one of equal value. When I started working there, I had 2 full orange crates of records, but a lot of them were Stevens that I wanted to get rid of. I was constantly trading out funky crap for classics. It took 18 months before I ran out of records to trade in and got my collection to a state of perfection. I was on my way to graduating with a 3.79 grade point average, and because I was always hanging around the Adelphi Communications Department, I won the award for the most outstanding student in my class. They called it the Richard C. Clemo Award. I actually had no idea what it meant until years later when Steve Langford, one of our Howard 100 news reporters, did some digging.